What if the oldest monuments did not survive because they were mysterious, but because later ages forgot how to understand them? Somewhere between the broken stones of abandoned sanctuaries, the drowned edges of ancient harbours, and the silent joints of walls that have resisted centuries of weather, a question still waits in the dark. How much of human knowledge has truly advanced, and how much has simply changed shape, leaving older forms of intelligence behind like footprints after the tide has withdrawn? So before you let your body sink completely into this quiet comfort, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you truly enjoy what I am doing here. And if the night is gentle where you are, share where you are listening from and what the local hour is in your corner of the world. There is a strange humility in standing before a structure that has outlived almost every explanation placed upon it. A wall does not argue. A pyramid does not defend itself. A sunken harbour does not rise from the water to correct a scholar, a tourist, or a man on the internet speaking too confidently into a camera. Stone remains still, and people mistake that silence for emptiness. Yet silence can carry memory in a form that language cannot. It can preserve the pressure of hands, the discipline of measurements, the decisions of planners whose names have become dust, and the practical knowledge of societies that built as if time were not an enemy but a material. The phrase lost engineering sounds, at first, like an invitation to fantasy. It tempts the imagination toward hidden machines, buried libraries, forbidden maps, and the comfortable thrill of believing that some enormous truth has been kept just beyond the edge of official history. Human beings have hidden knowledge before. Empires have burned archives, priests have guarded texts, conquerors have renamed cities and forced older memories into new shapes. But the deeper mystery may be quieter than conspiracy. Perhaps the most important forms of ancient knowledge were not always locked in books. Perhaps some of them lived in hands, in repeated work, in inherited technique, in the patient eye of a mason, in the trained ear of a quarryman listening to stone before it split. That kind of knowledge can disappear without flames. It can vanish when a workshop closes, when a trade line is broken, when a language dies, when a ruler stops funding temples, when a religion changes the meaning of old places, when an earthquake or drought scatters the people who carried the craft. The chain simply weakens. One generation remembers less than the one before. Method once ordinary becomes rare, then rare becomes ceremonial, then ceremonial becomes myth. Much later, strangers arrive with measuring devices and modern confidence, and they ask how the old ones did it. The question sounds innocent, but it carries a wound. How did they do it? Beneath those words is another assumption. How could they have done it? That assumption is where the past begins to darken. For a long time, ancient builders have been trapped between insult and exaggeration. One age calls them primitive, another calls them impossible. One imagines them as crude labourers dragging stones with no understanding. Another replaces them with vanished super-civilizations, travellers from the stars, or secret masters whose evidence always seems to disappear when it is needed. Both views steal something from the people who actually built the monuments. The older world does not need to be made magical in order to be astonishing. Its power lies partly in the fact that it was human. Human societies cut granite, moved megaliths, aligned buildings to the sky, made concrete that hardened in seawater, carved temples into cliffs, terraced mountainsides, guided water across deserts, and shaped walls that flexed with earthquakes instead of collapsing under them. None of this requires a miracle, but the absence of miracle does not make the achievement simple. It only makes the explanation more demanding, because then it must return to labour, memory, organisation, material intelligence, and time, and permanence changes every decision. A stone chosen for a wall is not merely a stone. It becomes a promise that the wall should remain after the builder's breath has left the world. A foundation is not merely a buried support. It is a conversation with soil, water, weight, and season still unborn. An alignment is not merely a pretty angle. It can be a statement that the ruler, the temple, or the dead belong to an order larger than human uncertainty. Still, something has been lost. That loss does not need to be total to matter. Modern engineers can reproduce the broad physical principles behind many ancient achievements. They can calculate load, simulate stress, lift heavier weights, and scan hidden chambers with instruments no ancient surveyor could have imagined. Yet the exact old way of doing certain things, under the old constraints, with the old tools in the old social systems, is often harder to recover than the finished stone suggests. The monument survives, but the process has become partial. The object remains visible. The world that made it has vanished. This is where the mystery becomes worth entering carefully. Not as a claim that history has lied about everything, not as a refusal of archaeology, geology, engineering, or material science, but as a slower and more honest question. What happens when a civilization produces work so durable that it outlives the institutions that explained it? What happens when the evidence is real, but the chain of method is broken? What happens when the past is neither primitive nor supernatural, but simply more capable, more patient, and more organized than modern vanity prefers to admit? In the ruins of that question, the first shape appears. It is not a pyramid yet, not a Roman harbour, not an Inca wall, not a temple carved into the mountain. It is the human hand itself, trained by repetition, guided by memory, and joined to thousands of other hands inside a society that knew how to turn belief into stone. Before the giant blocks can be moved, before the sky can be measured, before concrete can harden beneath the waves, one must look at the vanished builders and ask whether the real lost technology was never a machine at all. Perhaps it was a way of seeing the world so patiently that even stone seemed willing to remember. If the first mystery belongs to the monuments themselves, the second belongs to the people who disappeared behind them. The stone remains, the worker does not. The wall keeps its shape, but the hands that shaped it have gone into the same silence as the dust beneath the foundation. And perhaps that is why ancient engineering so often feels more mysterious than it needs to be. The visible thing survives with a kind of severe confidence, while the human system that produced it has thinned almost to nothing. A visitor can touch the surface of a block, but not the apprenticeship that taught someone how to dress it. A scholar can measure the angle of a corridor, but not fully recover the arguments, corrections, gestures, and habits that once made that angle possible. This absence is not small. It changes the way the past is imagined. When the builder vanishes, the monument begins to look as though it built itself, or as though it descended from some unreachable intelligence. Yet every ancient structure, no matter how sacred or royal its purpose, passed through ordinary human difficulty. Someone had to wake before the heat grew unbearable. Someone had to sharpen or repair a tool. Someone had to mark a line and trust that others would follow it. Someone had to notice that a stone was flawed before too much labour was wasted. Someone had to make food arrive, water arrive, rope arrive, timber arrive, orders arrive. The lost engineering of antiquity was never only in the object, it was in the coordination. This is one of the quietest forms of ancient genius, and perhaps one of the least celebrated. Modern eyes are drawn to scale, beauty, mystery, and damage. They are less often drawn to administration. Yet no great monument rises from inspiration alone. A ruler may dream of eternity. A priest may describe the correct relation between earth and sky. A court may demand a temple, a tomb, a harbour, a wall, or a ceremonial road. But the dream must pass into schedules, measurements, supply lines, Labour divisions, craft standards, and repeated decisions made under pressure. Without those things, vision becomes rubble before it becomes architecture. In this sense, the ancient builder was not a single figure, but a chain. At one end stood planners who understood layout, purpose, and sequence. Near them stood surveyors, watching the land and sky with cords, rods, sighting tools, water, shadow, and memory. In the quarries stood men who knew how stone opened, how it resisted, how it betrayed the careless. Along the routes stood crews who understood friction, slope, rest, leverage, and the danger of momentum. At the site itself, masons, carpenters, plasterers, rope makers, metalworkers, scribes, and overseers entered a rhythm that had to be maintained day after day, season after season. Any weak link could turn a sacred project into an expensive failure. The names of these people are mostly gone, and that erasure creates a strange distortion. History often remembers the one who commanded the monument, not the many who made it possible. The pyramid becomes the pharaohs, the temple becomes the kings, the road becomes the empires, the wall becomes the civilizations. There is truth in that, but not the whole truth. The authority may have ordered the work, paid for it, sanctified it, or forced it into being. Yet the stone itself remembers another reality. It remembers practical intelligence distributed across many bodies. It remembers a society that could train people well enough for the quality of work to remain stable across a scale too large for any one mind to control. That kind of stability is difficult. It is easy to underestimate because it does not look dramatic. A single master craftsman can produce something beautiful in isolation, but a vast structure requires consistency across distance, teams, and time. Measurements must mean the same thing to different workers. A foundation line must be understood by those who did not first mark it. A block cut far from the site must answer to a plan it cannot see. A wall built over many days must not slowly drift out of intention. For this to happen, ancient societies needed more than strength. They needed shared standards. They needed training. They needed correction. They needed trust in procedures older than the men currently using them. This is where the idea of simple tools begins to lose its force. A tool is never only the object held in the hand. It is also the tradition of use surrounding it. A plumb line is simple, but in skilled hands it becomes a vertical law. A cord is simple, but when stretched, checked, and used with geometry, it can order land. A wooden lever is simple, but only if one ignores the knowledge of fulcrum, load, timing, and restraint required to use it safely. A copper or bronze tool may seem poor beside modern steel, yet with abrasives, patience, and practiced technique, it can participate in work that still appears almost unreasonable to a hurried age. The vanished builders knew things in a way modern culture often struggles to respect. Much of their knowledge may not have been abstract, written, or preserved as theory. It may have lived in the eye, the wrist, the shoulder, the ear. A quarry worker might recognize a dangerous flaw by sound or texture. A mason might feel when two surfaces had begun to belong together. A surveyor might notice a small drift in alignment before anyone else could see it. A foreman might know, from years of labour, when a crew was moving too quickly, when a rope was under too much strain, when the ground would not hold. These are not lesser forms of knowledge. They are forms that disappear more easily because they depend on living transmission. When such transmission breaks, a civilization can lose more than techniques. It can lose a way of noticing. This may be one of the most important shadows behind lost engineering. People often imagine lost knowledge as a secret text hidden in a sealed chamber, waiting for rediscovery. Sometimes texts do matter. Archives, inscriptions, manuals, and records can preserve extraordinary things. But a craft tradition can fade even when no library burns. If apprentices are no longer trained, If old patronage collapses, if conquest scatters workshops, if religious meaning changes the demand for certain buildings, if cheaper methods replace slower ones, then knowledge drains away through ordinary time. No vigilance is required. Forgetting can be bureaucratic, economic, seasonal, almost gentle. And still, there were cases where forgetting was not gentle at all. Conquest could interrupt a building culture violently. Sacred sites could be abandoned, repurposed, or deliberately broken. Older systems of labor and belief could be condemned by new powers. The practical knowledge attached to those systems might survive for a while in fragments, then weaken when its reason for existing was removed. If no one asks for a certain kind of stone fitting anymore, fewer people learn it. If no one funds a certain kind of temple, the skills attached to that temple lose their home. A technique does not need to be disproven in order to vanish. It only needs to become unnecessary to the society that once carried it. This is why the ruins feel haunted in a way that has little to do with ghosts. They're haunted by missing competence. They present the final result without the daily world that made it normal. The wall remains, but not the smell of dust in the workshop. The platform remains, but not the shouted signals during a difficult lift. The carved surface remains, but not the hours of correction under a patient master's eye. The monument becomes lonely, and loneliness invites myth. Yet perhaps the better response is not to fill that loneliness too quickly. Perhaps it is to let the absence speak. Behind every ancient structure that seems to exceed its age, there may have been no impossible machine, only a society that knew how to make many ordinary skills behave like one extraordinary mind. And if that is true, then the next question becomes heavier. Because once those hands were trained, once those systems were in motion, once belief and authority could command years of labour, what did they dare to move? How large a stone could a civilization ask the earth to surrender before the earth began answering back? How large a stone would a civilization move before the question stopped being technical and became almost spiritual? The answer was never the same in every land. Some cultures raised stones as markers for the dead. Some set them beneath temples, where worshippers would never see the full labour buried below their feet. Some cut them from cliffs, dragged them across plains, floated them on rivers, or abandoned them half-born in the quarry when the stone itself refused to continue. Yet wherever the giants remain, they create the same disturbance in the mind. They do not merely ask how strong ancient people were, they ask how patiently a society could organize itself around weight. There is a particular kind of silence around very large stone. It is not the silence of emptiness, but of pressure. A block weighing hundreds of tons seems to press not only on the ground beneath it, but on the imagination of anyone trying to explain it too quickly. Ordinary language begins to fail. Words like moved, lifted, placed and quarried become too small. They hide more than they reveal. To say that a stone was transported may be true, but it tells almost nothing about the road prepared for it. The ropes that strained against it, the timber that groaned beneath it, the men who pulled in rhythm, the overseers who shouted timing, the engineers who feared one bad slope might undo months of work. Baalbek in present-day Lebanon has long carried this pressure. Beneath and around the great Roman sanctuary, among the stones associated with the Temple of Jupiter and its monumental platform, lie some of the most famous examples of ancient stone ambition. The so-called trilithon stones, each commonly estimated at hundreds of tons, still provoke the uneasy pause that comes when calculation meets reality. Nearby, in the quarry, unfinished giants remain in the earth, including the famous stone of the pregnant woman and other immense monoliths identified by modern researchers. They're not legends, they're not whispers, they're stone, and their existence narrows the room for lazy explanations. It would be easy, and false to make them supernatural. Difficulty is not proof of impossibility. The ancient world understood leverage, slope, friction, manpower, preparation, and the patient shaping of ground. Roman engineering and the local traditions around it could marshal enormous labour and practical intelligence. But the sober explanation is not a small explanation. It is larger than fantasy in one important sense. It must account for every stage. The block had to be cut without ruining it. It had to be separated, supported, moved along a prepared route, controlled against its own terrible momentum, and set into relation with a structure whose foundation had to receive it. Nothing about that process is casual. Every mistake would have had mass behind it. That is what giant stones reveal so clearly. They punish uncertainty. A small object allows improvisation. Very large stone does not. Once it begins to slide incorrectly, no priestly title, royal command, or hopeful song can persuade it to change its mind. Gravity is one of the few powers before which every ancient king and every modern engineer must speak softly. This is why the successful placement of megaliths is evidence not merely of force, but of restraint. To move such stones, builders had to slow danger down. They had to reduce the world into stages so carefully managed that the weight never escaped the system designed to contain it. The unfinished obelisk at Aswan offers a different kind of testimony. It never rose. It never cast its intended shadow over a temple court. It remains attached to the bedrock, cracked, abandoned, and therefore strangely generous to the present. A completed monument often hides its making. An unfinished one exposes the moment where intention met resistance. The obelisk shows that Egyptian builders were willing to attempt a single stone of extraordinary scale, and it also shows that they were not beyond failure. The crack did not make them foolish, it made them real. They were working near the edge of what their methods, materials, and judgment could safely command. There is something important in that failure. It protects the ancient world from becoming too perfect. If every enormous stone had been moved and raised without trouble, the story would become suspiciously smooth. But the quarry failures, abandoned blocks, interrupted works, and unfinished monuments give the past back its human texture. They reveal trial, risk, loss, and decision. A builder had to know when a stone was no longer worth saving. A ruler had to accept, however bitterly, that not every command could overcome a fracture running through granite. The abandoned stone becomes a kind of confession. They were capable of astonishing things, but they were still negotiating with matter. Egypt's pyramids carry the question of weight in another form. Their mystery is not simply the size of the largest blocks, though some were formidable, especially in granite chambers and structural elements. The deeper difficulty lies in repetition at scale. A pyramid is not a single heroic lift. It is an organized mountain built through thousands upon thousands of decisions. Quarrying, hauling, leveling, aligning, placing, correcting, feeding workers, maintaining tools, timing labor with seasons, and preserving geometric intention over years. If one stone is a problem of strength, a pyramid is a problem of civilization. This is where modern imagination often makes a quiet mistake. It imagines ancient labor as a crowd. But a crowd cannot build a pyramid. A crowd can panic, celebrate, riot, or pull something badly for a short time. A workforce is different. A workforce has food, order, roles, records, supervisors, routines, rest, discipline, and purpose. The pyramid builders of Egypt were not a formless mass. Evidence from workers' settlements, administrative systems, tool marks, and logistics suggests something more organized and more human. Crews with identities, rations, skill, injury, pride, and obligation. The monument may have served royal eternity, but its construction belonged to living people whose days were measured in dust and effort. The same tension appears across the world in different shapes. At Stonehenge, the stones are not the heaviest known from antiquity, yet the distance, landscape, erection, and changing phases of the monument keep the question alive. In the Andes, massive stones at places like Sacsayhuaman do not impress only by weight, but by their fitted relation to one another, as if size had been joined to patience. In many ancient sites, the real difficulty was not merely making a stone move, but making it arrive with purpose intact. A badly dragged stone is only debris in transit. A megalith in its final position is a completed sentence. Perhaps that is why these giants still trouble the mind. They stand at the border between physical explanation and social explanation. The physics may be possible, but the society required to enact it is harder to imagine from a world of short deadlines and temporary buildings. Modern people can lift heavier things with machines, yet that does not mean they understand, in their bones, what it meant for a pre-industrial society to spend months or years persuading stone to become authority. The true mystery is not that ancient people moved weight. It is that they built cultures in which moving such weight made sense. And if the stone itself was already a test, then what came after was stranger still. For many ancient builders, placing the giant block was not enough. It had to meet another stone with accuracy. It had to sit level, hold a line, preserve an angle, answer to a wall, a chamber, a horizon, or a sacred axis. Force had done its part, but force alone could not finish the work. Once the giants arrived, the builders had to prove they could control not only size but precision. If weight forced ancient builders to bargain with gravity, precision forced them to bargain with doubt. A giant stone could astonish from far away, but a precise stone becomes more unsettling the closer one stands to it. The seam narrows, the line holds, the surface weathered by centuries still seems to remember an intention that should have blurred long ago. And then the question changes. Not how did they move it, but how did they know where it belonged? How did hands without steel machines, laser levels, digital models, or factory cutting produce work that still makes observers lean nearer? Precision has a quieter power than scale. It waits inside joints, angles, foundations, corridors, curves, and surfaces where mistakes would have remained visible for generations. A huge stone proves that a society could command labour. A well-fitted stone proves that a society could command attention. It suggests not only strength, but discipline, not only ambition, but correction, not only belief, but a shared standard of what was acceptable and what was not. Modern people often imagine precision as a gift of machines. The present age is surrounded by industrial regularity. Bolts match, glass panels align, steel parts arrive, cut to measurements too fine for the naked eye. Yet the ancient world produced precision by other means. It used slower paths, cords, plumb lines, sighting rods, water levels, straight edges, measuring sticks, templates, abrasion, fitting, patient correction, and the judgment of workers who learned to see small errors before those errors became structural truths. The Great Pyramid at Giza remains one of the clearest examples because its fame has not exhausted it. The broad geometry, the orientation, the levelling of the base, and the scale of execution do not suggest careless approximation. However the final procedures were carried out, they required surveyors who could establish direction, teams who could preserve a plan across an immense footprint, and supervisors who understood that the first errors at the base would become larger accusations higher up. No satellite was needed. Something else was needed. Continuity of method, repeated checking, and a culture in which measurement carried sacred and political weight. Water may have been one of the oldest teachers of level. It does not flatter kings, it simply finds its own plane. Ancient builders could use channels, trenches, vessels, and careful transfer of marks to establish level surfaces over areas that would defeat mere eyesight. A cord stretched between points could impose line. A plumb bob could give vertical truth. Geometry could turn simple tools into serious instruments. A tool outside its procedure is only a relic. A tool inside a disciplined culture becomes a way of thinking. Stone shaping reveals the same lesson. A hard block does not need to be conquered all at once. It can be persuaded slowly. Surfaces can be pecked, ground, rubbed, checked, marked, and corrected. Abrasives can do what softer metals cannot do alone. Sand, water, pressure, rhythm, and time can become a cutting system without ever resembling a modern machine. To a hurried mind, this sounds inefficient. To an ancient builder, if the monument was meant to endure, slowness could be part of seriousness. This becomes visible in the fitted masonry of the Andes. At places associated with Inca construction, such as Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo, the stones do not behave like modern standardized parts. They are irregular, sometimes massive, and yet they meet one another with a confidence that seems almost organic. Their shapes are not random. They answer to adjacent surfaces, to load, to movement, to the instability of an earthquake-prone world. The achievement is not factory precision. It is local precision, stone by stone, joint by joint, each block made to belong to its neighbours rather than to an abstract template. That distinction matters. Modern precision often repeats identical units. Ancient precision often created unique relationships. 1,000 identical pieces can be impressive, but so can a wall in which no two stones need to be the same, because each has been adjusted into a particular place. Much of that work must have happened through cycles of fitting and correction. Bring the stone close, mark the high points, remove a little, try again, watch the seam, adjust the bed. Nothing here requires fantasy, but everything requires patience so deep it begins to look foreign to a faster age. Roman engineering offers another form of precision, not always in the seam of stone, but in the control of space. An aqueduct must carry water across distance with a gradient neither too steep nor too weak. An arch must direct weight into support. A dome must manage mass, void, compression, and material variation. The Pantheon in Rome remains powerful partly because its precision is not decorative. Its geometry is structural. Its dome, oculus, walls, and changing materials suggest builders who knew how form and weight could cooperate. None of this means ancient builders always succeeded. Walls moved, foundations failed, stones cracked. Some buildings collapsed and left no admired ruin for travellers to praise. But the surviving works show what happened when craft, administration, belief, and correction aligned. Precision was often a social achievement. Workers had to share standards, apprentices had to learn them, measurements had to be trusted by those who did not invent them. The line had to survive from the mind of the planner into the hands of people who may never receive a name. This is the place where lost engineering becomes most intimate. The missing thing may not be a secret device. It may be a vanished tolerance of slowness, a vanished respect for correction, a vanished world in which the hand was trained so carefully that it became part of the measuring system. What modern instruments do quickly, ancient societies sometimes did collectively, patiently, and with such repetition that the method sank below language. When the people disappeared, the precision remained behind, almost cruelly clear, like handwriting from a person whose voice can no longer be heard. Yet precision did not end at the surface of stone. Once a wall could hold a line and a foundation could hold a level, another possibility opened. A building could be made to answer not only to the ground beneath it, but to the sky above it. The same chords that ordered land could be turned towards sunrise. The same patience that narrowed a seam could follow the moon, the solstice, the slow return of a star. Perhaps this is where ancient engineering begins to feel most like memory, when architecture stops being construction and becomes a way for the earth to remember the heavens. When a building begins to answer the sky, the past becomes harder to dismiss as merely heavy or clever. Stone can be explained as labour. A wall can be explained as craft. A road can be explained as administration. But a monument that turns towards sunrise on a particular day, or catches shadow in a way that seems timed to the turning of the year, asks a different kind of question. It suggests that the builders were not only arranging matter, they were arranging memory. They were giving the sky a place to touch the earth, and giving human life a rhythm larger than hunger, politics, and sleep. The sky was the oldest clock available to civilization. It needed no temple to exist, no king to command it, no priest to invent it. The sun returned with unsettling loyalty. The moon altered its face and wandered through cycles that could be watched, named, and remembered. Stars appeared, vanished, and came back with seasons. Shadows lengthened and shortened. Horizon points shifted across the year. To people whose survival depended on planting, flooding, migration, ceremony, and the return of ordered time, the sky was not decoration. It was structure. It was a book without pages, readable only by those willing to watch for long enough. This may be one of the most easily misunderstood forms of ancient engineering. Modern people often separate science, religion, politics, and architecture into different rooms of the mind. Ancient societies often did not. A temple could be a ritual space, a political statement, a calendar, a map of cosmic order, and a monument to royal legitimacy all at once. To align a building was not necessarily to make an observatory in the modern sense. It could be to place a community inside a pattern it believed was sacred, necessary, and true. The line of a wall might be a line of power. The path of sunlight might be a form of authority. Stonehenge carries this burden almost too heavily. It has been described so often, argued over so often, simplified so often, and wrapped in so many modern projections that the monument sometimes disappears beneath its own fame. Yet in the quiet it still does what it has always done. It stands in relation to sky, horizon, movement, death, ceremony, and landscape. Its connection with the solstitial sun is not an accident of imagination, even if many details remain debated. The stones were raised within a world that clearly cared about direction, procession, burial, and celestial timing. They do not give back a full explanation. They give back a pattern with missing voices inside it. That is the difficulty. Alignment can be visible while meaning remains partial. A stone may point towards sunrise, but it cannot tell the listener whether that sunrise marked renewal, kingship, mourning, harvest, ancestor ritual, or something more layered than one modern term can hold. Archaeology can narrow the field. It can study phases of construction, burials, surrounding avenues, landscape features, and astronomical relationships. But the inner language of the builders often remains just beyond reach. The monument faces the sky, and the present faces the monument, each one partly unable to translate the other. In Egypt, the sky was not a distant backdrop. It was woven into kingship, death, order, and the sacred geography of temples and tombs. The cardinal orientation of pyramids, the solar emphasis of many sacred spaces, and the careful relationship between architecture and cosmic order suggest a civilization that did not treat direction casually. A pyramid did not simply occupy land, it entered a universe of meaning. To point correctly was to belong correctly. To align the work was to make a statement about the pharaoh, the gods, the dead, and the stability of the world. The methods do not need to be exotic to be profound. A surveyor could watch stars, a team could mark shadows, repeated observations could refine direction, Chords could transfer decisions onto Earth. Lines could be checked, corrected, and extended. The wonder is not that people noticed the heavens. The wonder is that societies preserved those observations long enough and valued them deeply enough to turn them into stone. The sky became architecture through patience. That transformation may be one of the clearest signs that ancient engineering was never only technical. It was devotional, administrative, political, and intellectual at the same time. In Mesoamerica, the relationship between building and celestial rhythm appears with another kind of intensity. Maya astronomers and calendar keepers observed cycles of the sun, moon, Venus, and longer spans of time with a sophistication that still resists any lazy idea of a simple past. Their temples and cities were not random accumulations of stone. Many were planned within systems of time, direction, ritual, and rulership. At Chichen Itza, the pyramid known as El Castillo is often associated with the play of light and shadow at the equinox, when the descending serpent effect has become famous far beyond its original cultural setting. Modern tourism may simplify the event, but the larger point remains. The builders belonged to a civilization deeply attentive to celestial cycles and their earthly meaning. To build with the sky requires more than one inspired glance upward. It requires continuity. Someone must notice the pattern. Someone must preserve it. Someone must decide that the pattern matters enough to guide construction. Someone must translate observation into layout, layout into labor, labor into stone, and stone into repeated experience. A monument aligned to an event is not only an object, it is a scheduled encounter. It waits all year or for a longer cycle to reveal part of itself. The building becomes patient in a way human beings are not. Perhaps that is why such monuments feel haunted. They still keep appointments with a sky whose original witnesses are gone. The sun continues to rise, the shadow still moves, the moon still returns, but the chants, fears, calculations, ceremonies, and expectations that once gave those moments their full meaning have thinned into speculation. The structure performs, but the audience has changed. Modern visitors arrive with cameras, guided tours, skepticism, excitement, and theories. The monument does not explain itself, it simply waits for the light. There is a warning here for anyone who wants easy answers. Not every claimed alignment is meaningful. Some are accidental, some are exaggerated. Some are created by selective attention because if enough lines are drawn across enough stones, something will eventually point somewhere. The ancient world deserves better than careless wonder. But it also deserves better than careless dismissal. The task is to hold both truths at once. People can imagine patterns that were never intended, and ancient builders really did encode sky knowledge into architecture in ways that shaped ritual and power. The lost engineering here may not be a lost machine, but a lost relationship. A way of living beneath the sky so attentively that its cycles entered building practice. A way of measuring time not only by numbers, but by light passing through stone, by shadow touching a stair, by a chamber brightening on one rare morning, by a road or temple axis holding a community inside a cosmic frame. If that relationship faded, something more than astronomy was lost. A civilization's sense of belonging to order may have faded with it. And yet the stones still turn. They still face where they were made to face. They still catch light, even when no one agrees entirely on what the light once meant. Beneath this quiet survival lies another mystery, deeper and more material. For some ancient builders did not only make monuments that remembered the sky, they made substances that remembered the sea, the rain, the pressure of time itself. And among those substances, one of the most troubling is not a megalith or a temple, but something humbler, poured and mixed by human hands. Concrete that should have died and did not. What does it mean when a material outlives the empire that mixed it? Stone can seem eternal because the mind expects stone to endure. But concrete feels different. Concrete is made. It is an agreement between crushed earth, fire, water, lime, sand, ash, labour, and timing. It begins as something humble, wet and shapeless, a grey promise poured into place. If it survives for 2,000 years, especially where waves strike and salt water should have been an enemy, the question becomes strangely intimate. What did they know about matter that later ages forgot? Roman concrete has become one of the clearest examples of ancient engineering that resists simple arrogance. It is not that modern concrete cannot be strong. The modern world is full of bridges, dams, towers, tunnels, foundations and ports made with materials of astonishing calculated power. Yet some Roman marine structures have endured in conditions where many modern concretes suffer, crack, corrode, and fail far sooner than expected. Ancient harbour works and submerged masses in the Mediterranean remain as witnesses to a recipe that was not merely durable, but alive in its own slow chemical way. For a long time, this durability seemed almost like an old rumour embedded in masonry. The Romans used volcanic ash, especially material associated with the region around the Bay of Naples, and combined it with lime and aggregate to create a concrete that behaved differently from many modern mixtures. Ancient writers such as Vitruvius described the value of volcanic powders that could harden even underwater. The description was not magic, it was observation. Someone had noticed that certain earths, when mixed properly, produced a material with unusual strength in wet conditions. The knowledge was local, practical, and tied to geology. The land itself had given the empire an ingredient, and Roman builders learned how to make that ingredient serve power. There is something quietly unsettling about that. The Romans did not need to understand chemistry in modern language to understand effect. They did not need to name every mineral reaction to recognize that one mixture endured better than another. They tested, repeated, adapted, and built. In that sense, their concrete was empirical knowledge hardened into infrastructure. Every surviving pier was a statement that the mixture had entered a partnership with seawater instead of simply resisting it. Modern studies have suggested that the reaction between volcanic ash, lime and seawater could help form durable mineral structures inside the concrete over time. In some cases, the very environment that threatens ordinary materials may have contributed to the long life of Roman marine concrete. The sea did not merely attack. Under the right conditions, it participated. A structure placed into the water could slowly change, strengthen, or seal itself in ways its makers may have known through results, even if they did not describe the process as a modern laboratory would. There is also the matter of lime. Some research has drawn attention to small white lime-rich fragments, once dismissed by some as signs of poor mixing, and suggested they may have played a role in self-healing behaviour. When cracks formed, water moving through the material could interact with these fragments and help create new mineral deposits that seal the damage. The ancient recipe may have carried within it a tolerance for injury, a way for the material to answer time not by remaining perfect, but by repairing what time opened. And yet caution is necessary. Roman concrete was not one single perfect substance used everywhere in the same way. It varied by place, by available materials, by purpose, by skill, by period, and by the demands of the structure. Not every Roman building survived. Not every mixture was miraculous. Some structures failed, some decayed, some were quarried for later use, some disappeared into weather, war, neglect, and reuse. The surviving examples can tempt the mind into imagining a flawless ancient recipe, but history is rarely so generous. What survives may be the best evidence of what worked, not proof that everything worked equally well. Still, the endurance is real enough to humble, It reminds the present that technical superiority cannot be measured only by novelty. Modern concrete often uses steel reinforcement, and steel brings enormous strength, but also vulnerability when water and corrosion enter the system. Ancient Roman marine concrete followed another logic. It did not rely on embedded iron in the same way. It became something suited to its own materials, coastlines, builders, and understanding of permanence. This is where lost engineering becomes less like a missing formula and more like a broken ecology. The Roman recipe depended on geography, labour, trade, quarrying, burning lime, knowing which ash mattered, and having institutions capable of using that knowledge across large works. Remove the empire, disrupt the supply chains, change building priorities, lose the trained habits, and the material culture begins to thin. The knowledge may not vanish in one dramatic night. It may survive in fragments, in regional practices, in texts few can interpret fully, in ruins admired by people who no longer need to build the same harbours in the same way. Concrete has a special power because it seems so ordinary. It is not a jewelled object in a tomb. It belongs to harbours, foundations, vaults, drains, walls, and the bones of cities. It is the kind of material people stop seeing because it is everywhere, and perhaps that is why its survival is so disturbing. The lost knowledge may not always be hidden in sacred chambers. It may be underfoot, beneath waves, holding up a ruin while generations pass above it, with explanations that arrive late. So the question deepens. If the Romans could make a mixture that learned to endure in the sea what other ancient builders learned to cooperate with water instead of simply fighting it? The next mystery does not sit only in walls or harbours, but in channels, cisterns, stepwells, aqueducts, reservoirs, and cities that survived because someone understood the movement of water through a dry and dangerous world. Stone may remember the hand, concrete may remember the sea, but water remembers every mistake. And in the ancient world, those who failed to listen to it often disappeared. If water remembers every mistake, then the ancient world was full of teachers that did not forgive. A misplaced channel could drown a field. A poorly graded aqueduct could slow into uselessness or rush into ruin. A reservoir built without understanding pressure, silt, evaporation, and season could become a monument not to intelligence, but to thirst. And yet again and again, in deserts, mountains, valleys, and cities crowded against their own limits, ancient builders learn to guide water with a patience that seems almost invisible until one imagines life without it. Perhaps the most enduring monuments were not always the tallest ones. Perhaps some of them were hidden in the dark, carrying water quietly beneath the feet of people who rarely praised the engineering that kept them alive. Water engineering is a different kind of lost knowledge because it does not always seek attention. A pyramid commands the horizon. A giant stone stops the eye. A rock-cut temple announces its labour in shadow and facade. But a good drain, canal, cistern, or underground channel succeeds by disappearing into usefulness. It works, and because it works, ordinary life continues. Crops grow, animals drink, pilgrims arrive, cities expand, rituals take place, markets open. Children are born into settlements that seem natural, though their survival depends on decisions made in earth and stone by people whose names were never meant to be remembered. Petra offers one of the most haunting examples. To many visitors, it appears first as a city of carved facades, rose-coloured cliffs, and dramatic entrances through stone. But behind the beauty was a harder truth. Petra stood in a landscape where water could not be treated casually. The Nabateans built systems of channels, dams, cisterns, ceramic pipelines, and carefully managed collection works that allowed a desert city to gather, store, slow, and distribute precious flow. The place was not merely carved from rock. It was negotiated with aridity. Its survival depended on understanding both sudden flood and long dryness, the violence of too much water and the danger of too little. There is something quietly profound in that balance. Modern imagination often thinks of desert engineering as a battle against absence. But the more difficult problem is rhythm. Water may arrive rarely, then all at once. A flash flood can destroy what drought has spared. The engineer must think like a listener, not a conqueror. Where will water rush when the sky breaks open? Where will silt gather? Where can flow be slowed without being lost? Where can it be stored away from heat, contamination, collapse and theft? Petra's water system suggests a society that did not simply endure its environment, but read it closely enough to make stone, slope and storage answer the needs of life. The Roman aqueducts show another face of the same intelligence. They are often admired for their arches, but the arch is only the visible flourish of a longer discipline. The true work is gradient. Water moving over distance must be persuaded with extraordinary care. Too steep, and the current damages the channel. Too shallow, and the system fails to deliver. Across valleys, hills, tunnels, bridges, and urban approaches, the line must continue with a precision that is not dramatic but relentless. The aqueduct becomes a sentence written across terrain, and one wrong phrase can ruin the meaning. It is tempting to see these systems as simple because water flows naturally downhill. But nature's willingness to move is not the same as civilization's ability to direct it. The Romans needed surveying, maintenance, legal control, labor, cleaning crews, settling tanks, distribution basins, pipes, and public authority. An aqueduct did not end when the water reached the city. It entered politics. Who received it? Who paid for it? Who repaired it? Who guarded it from damage or theft? Water is never only engineering, it is power made liquid. Far from Rome, other societies answered water with different forms of patience. In India, stepwells descended into the earth like inverted temples, joining architecture, climate, ritual, and survival. Their stairways did not only provide access to water. As levels changed through the seasons, they created shaded spaces, social spaces, sacred spaces, and monuments to the fact that, in dry regions, descent itself could become devotion. The engineering was practical, but the experience was symbolic. One moved downward toward water, as if approaching a hidden mercy beneath the hot surface of the world. In Persia and surrounding regions, qanat systems carried groundwater through gently sloping underground channels from uplands toward fields and settlements. Such systems required careful surveying, vertical shafts, maintenance, and an understanding of slope subtle enough that the water would flow without destroying the channel. They were not grand in the way a palace is grand. Their grandeur was subterranean. They extended human settlement by turning hidden water into a slow, controlled breath. If neglected, they could collapse or dry. If maintained, they could sustain life for centuries. At Angkor, the question of water grew to the scale of landscape. Reservoirs, canals, moats, embankments, and temple relationships formed a vast hydraulic world, though scholars continue to debate exactly how every element functioned and how water management related to the city's rise and strain. The point is not that one simple theory explains everything. It is that the built landscape itself reveals an enormous commitment to managing flow, storage, ritual meaning, and urban survival. Water there was not an accessory to civilization. It was part of the civilization's body. And yet water systems are especially vulnerable to broken memory. A stone block may remain impressive even when neglected. A canal fills, a drain clogs, a qanat collapses, a reservoir silts. A maintenance routine forgotten for one generation can undo centuries of work. This may be why hydraulic knowledge can vanish so quietly. The ruin left behind may not look like a failure of intelligence. only like a dry channel, a buried pipe, a stepwell filled with debris, a forgotten embankment beneath vegetation. The system dies not because its builders were wrong, but because the living no longer continue the conversation with water. Perhaps this is the hidden sorrow of ancient engineering. Many of its greatest achievements were not single acts, but relationships requiring care. A harbour must be maintained, a canal must be cleared, a reservoir must be managed, a water law must be enforced, a flood system must be repaired before the next season tests it. When the society weakens, the structure may still exist, but the rhythm that kept it alive begins to fail. Water finds the gaps. It carries away the neglected edge. It proves year by year that engineering is never finished if life depends on it. So the old channels ask a question more unsettling than stone. They ask whether knowledge is truly possessed if it cannot be maintained. They ask whether a civilization collapses when its monuments fall, or earlier, when the routines that fed, drained, cooled, irrigated, and protected it begin to break. And from water, the path turns back towards stone in another form, not stone lifted into walls, but stone hollowed into cities, temples, chambers, and shelters. For some ancient builders did not merely place architecture upon the earth. They entered the body of the earth itself and carved absence into design. If water taught ancient builders how to listen to movement, rock-cut architecture taught them how to listen to stillness. There is a strange difference between placing stone and entering it. A wall is assembled from chosen pieces. A temple cut into a cliff is discovered by removal. Begins as a mountain, a cave, a face of rock, a body of earth that has no need to become human space. Then, slowly, through tools, dust, rhythm, and belief, emptiness is carved into meaning. The builders do not raise the structure into the world, they persuade the world to open. This is one of the most difficult forms of ancient engineering to imagine properly because it reverses ordinary construction. In most buildings, error can sometimes be corrected by adding, replacing, or adjusting. In rock-cut architecture, every wrong removal is permanent. The stone taken away cannot be put back in its original strength. A column cut too thin, a ceiling left too weak, a chamber misjudged too deeply, a facade planned without respect for the rock's natural fractures. These mistakes are not small. They can turn sacred ambition into collapse. To carve architecture from living stone requires not only vision, but restraint. Petra again stands at this threshold. Its facades seem almost theatrical at first, as if the mountain itself has learned to imitate a palace. But beneath the beauty is a harder intelligence. The Nabatean builders had to understand the sandstone, its layers, weathering, weaknesses, and how carved surfaces would receive light. The great entrance through the Es-Seker already prepares the mind for a world where landscape and architecture are not separate. Then the facades appear, cut directly into the cliffs, not merely placed against them. The city becomes a negotiation between human intention and geological patience. Yet Petra was not only a display. Its carved spaces, tombs, water systems, pathways, and sacred places belong to a living urban and ritual world. Later viewers often separate the image from the system because the image survives more easily in memory. A rose-coloured facade becomes a symbol, but the real achievement was not only the facade. It was the decision to make stone, water, trade, burial, worship, and landscape operate together. A carved city is not simply architecture. It is a civilization choosing to leave its mark by entering the material that surrounded it. In India, the rock-cut caves of Ajanta and Ellora bring the question into another register. There, temples, monasteries, halls, sculptures, columns, and sacred images were carved from basalt cliffs over centuries. At Ellora, the Kailasa temple is especially staggering because it was not assembled from blocks in the usual way. It was excavated downward and inward from a single mass of rock. creating a freestanding temple complex through removal. The imagination struggles with this. The builder must have held an invisible structure inside the stone before the stone released it. Every surface revealed had to be anticipated. Every cut was a step away from correction. There's a meditative terror in that kind of work. To build by subtraction is to accept that the finished form is hidden inside a mass that gives no easy promise of success. The plan must be strong. The sequence must be disciplined. Workers must know where to begin, how much to remove, where to leave support, how to shape proportion, how to keep columns aligned, how to avoid weakening what must carry weight. The art is visible, but the logistics of removal are just as astonishing. Stone chips had to be cleared, light and access had to be managed, labour had to be coordinated across long periods. Faith may have inspired the work, but faith alone cannot calculate a ceiling. Underground cities such as Derinkuyu in Cappadocia introduce yet another kind of hidden engineering. Here the concern is not monumental display, but shelter, storage, ventilation, movement, and defence within the earth. Multi-level subterranean spaces, carved into soft volcanic rock and expanded over time, suggest communities adapting to danger and environment with remarkable practical intelligence. Tunnels, rooms, shafts, stables, churches, storage areas, and ventilation systems were not arranged randomly. Underground life requires air, orientation, access control, and planning. Darkness magnifies every mistake. The mystery of such places is not that people dug. Humans have always dug. The deeper question is how repeated digging became a habitable system. A cave can be accidental shelter. An underground city is organized absence. It must allow people to move without losing themselves, breathe without seeing the sky, store food without ruin, close entrances against threat, and perhaps remain hidden long enough for danger to pass above. The engineering is not only in the tunnels, it is in the decision to make the earth itself become refuge. Rock-cut architecture also complicates the idea of permanence. A tower rises and can fall outward. A carved chamber remains held in the body of the mountain, protected and threatened by the same mass. It may survive because it is sheltered from wind, or decay because water seeps through unseen cracks. It may feel eternal yet depend entirely on the original builder's understanding of geology. The mountain is not passive. It presses, shifts, weathers, absorbs, and sometimes breaks. To carve within it is to enter the contract whose terms unfold over centuries. Perhaps this is why rock-cut monuments feel so haunted. They seem less built than uncovered. A visitor walking through them may feel that human intention has passed into stone so deeply that it can no longer be separated from the landscape. The chisel marks, columns, shrines, burial chambers, corridors, and silent halls are not objects placed in nature. They're wounds made meaningful. They show a civilization willing to spend extraordinary labour not to conquer stone from outside, but to hollow it into memory from within. And if knowledge was lost here, it may have been lost in sequences. Not merely what to carve, but when to stop. Not merely where to dig, but how to read stone before the first blow. Not merely how to decorate a chamber, but how to leave enough mass behind so that the sacred space did not become a tomb for its makers. Such knowledge belongs to workers who understood patience as safety. It belongs to traditions in which the unseen interior was imagined before it was exposed. From these carved spaces the path widens again. For ancient engineering was not confined to monuments, temples, harbours, or hidden cities. Some civilizations reshaped entire landscapes until roads, terraces, fields, walls, and drainage systems became one enormous machine. They did not only build within nature, they altered the terms by which nature could be lived in. And there, on mountainsides and across impossible distances, the lost engineering of the ancient world becomes not a single structure, but a whole inhabited earth. If the mountain could be carved, it could also be taught to carry life. This may be the quieter revolution hidden behind many ancient landscapes. Not the single wall that stops the eye, not the temple that gathers worship, not the tomb that turns death into stone, but the patient reshaping of whole environments until earth, water, road, field, slope, and settlement begin to work together. The lost engineering of ancient civilizations was sometimes not a monument at all. It was a way of making the land itself behave as infrastructure. A terrace on a mountainside does not seem as mysterious as a megalith at first glance. It is lower, humbler, more useful. It does not usually invite the same breathless theories, yet it may reveal an intelligence just as deep. A slope is not naturally generous to agriculture. Rain runs away, soil slips, seeds wash downward, paths erode, water gathers where it should not and disappears where it is needed most. To terrace a mountain is to interrupt gravity without denying it. It is to slow descent, hold soil, guide water, create level ground from angle, and turn danger into harvest. In the Andes, this kind of engineering reached extraordinary forms. Inca and pre-Inca terraces stepped across steep terrain with a discipline that joined agriculture, drainage, temperature management, and political organization. These were not decorative scars on the mountain, they were working systems. Stone retaining walls held soil in place. Layers of fill helped control moisture. Channels and drainage prevented destructive saturation. Different elevations created different growing conditions. A mountainside became a series of carefully managed microclimates, a vertical landscape of survival. There is a quiet lesson in that. Ancient engineering was often adaptive rather than dominant. It did not always crush the environment into submission. Sometimes it learned the weaknesses of a place and turned them into structure. A terrace accepts that water moves downward, but slows it. It accepts that slopes erode, but braces them. It accepts that temperature changes with height, but uses that variation. The mountain is not defeated, it is edited. The Inca road system carries the same logic across distance. Stretching through some of the most difficult terrain in the world, the roads connected highlands, valleys, administrative centers, sacred places, storehouses, and imperial power. They crossed mountains, deserts, rivers, and ravines. They included steps, causeways, retaining walls, drainage, bridges, and stations. The road was not merely a path, it was the skeleton of an empire. Along it moved messengers, armies, officials, goods, commands, tribute, and memory. A road seems simple until one asks what it must survive. Rain, landslides, snow, heat, floods, animals, footsteps, political change, neglect. In steep terrain, every route is an argument against difficulty. The road must choose where the body can move, where a load can pass, where water will cross, where the ground can hold, where a bridge can be anchored, where repair will remain possible. The map is not enough. The land must be felt underfoot. A line across mountains must be negotiated stone by stone, ridge by ridge, valley by valley. Roman roads answered different landscapes with different forms of order. Their famous straightness was never only aesthetic. It expressed administration, military movement, trade, and the ability of power to make distance legible. A road allowed empire to arrive faster. It allowed orders to move, soldiers to march, taxes to circulate, cities to bind themselves into a larger system. Beneath the surface lay layers, drainage, preparation, and maintenance. The visible road was the final skin of a deeper structure. And yet roads, like water systems, depend on living care. A road can outlast an army, but not forever without repair. Drainage channels clog, stones loosen, bridges rot or collapse, vegetation returns, landslides erase certainty. When the political system that maintains a road weakens, the road becomes a relic of movement rather than an instrument of it. Travellers may still follow parts of it. Shepherds may remember it. Villagers may reuse its stones. But the network as network begins to die. The engineering remains in fragments, like a thought interrupted. This is one reason ancient landscapes can be hard to read. A broken temple announces itself. A broken landscape system disguises itself as nature returning. A canal becomes a ditch. A terrace becomes a strange line under grass. A road becomes a ridge. A field boundary becomes a shadow seen from above. Modern aerial photography, satellite imagery, LiDAR and careful survey have begun revealing how many ancient environments were more heavily shaped than they once appeared from the ground. The wilderness, in some places, may be younger than the engineering hidden beneath it. That thought is unsettling. It suggests that the past is not only buried under cities but under forests, fields, deserts and assumptions. Places once dismissed as empty may contain old causeways, agricultural grids, reservoirs, settlement patterns, and managed soils. Ancient people were not merely living in landscapes, they were constructing them, sometimes so thoroughly that later observers mistook the result for untouched nature after the maintenance systems disappeared. In Mesoamerica, raised fields, causeways, reservoirs, and urban planning reveal societies that worked with wetlands, seasonal water, and dense populations in ways still being studied and debated. In the Amazon, research into earthworks, managed forests, and dark-enriched soils has challenged older ideas of untouched wilderness. The evidence does not support careless fantasies of a single lost global civilization, but it does warn against a smaller mistake, imagining that ancient peoples lived lightly simply because their cities did not always look like modern ones. Some altered environments deeply, intelligently, and over long periods. Landscape engineering is easy to lose because it is spread out. A monument can stand alone and still be admired. A terrace system, a road network, a canal grid, or a managed forest only reveals its full meaning through relationship. Remove the people who maintain it, and the pattern weakens. Remove the story, and the pattern becomes background. Remove the political system, and the roads no longer speak to one another. Remove the farmers, and the terraces no longer know what they were holding. Perhaps this is why the lost engineering of landscapes feels so melancholy. It shows civilizations not only building things, but becoming woven into places. Their knowledge was not stored in a single stone or text. It was distributed across slopes, channels, bridges, soils, paths, storehouses, and seasonal routines. To lose that knowledge was to lose a way of inhabiting the earth. And once the landscape forgets its maintenance, it begins to look natural again, as if no one had ever taught it to carry a civilization. But the land does not forget completely. A line remains under grass. A wall holds a terrace long after the field is gone. A road cuts through a high pass where no modern traveller expects it. A causeway appears beneath forest shadow. And these traces lead toward another, stranger question. If ancient builders could shape weight, water, stone, sky, and landscape, did they also shape something less visible, sound, ritual, and the human body moving through sacred space? If stone could hold weight, water, direction, and memory, perhaps it could also hold sound. This is a more fragile question than the others, and for that reason it must be approached slowly. Sound leaves fewer ruins than walls. It does not remain in the air for archaeologists to brush clean. A chant dies as soon as the mouth closes. A drumbeat fades before the next generation can inherit it. A footstep in a corridor becomes silence almost instantly. And yet ancient architecture was not seen only by the eye. It was heard, entered, crossed, echoed through, and felt inside the body. Some monuments may have been designed not merely to stand, but to resonate. This is where the border between evidence and imagination becomes especially thin. It is tempting to say too much. A chamber echoes, and suddenly it is called a machine for altered consciousness. A stone rings when struck, and suddenly the whole site becomes a lost acoustic technology. A temple produces an unusual sound effect, and the modern mind, hungry for mystery, builds a large theory on a small vibration. The danger is real. Ancient sound studies deserve care because sound can become fantasy faster than stone. But careless dismissal is also a kind of blindness. Ritual spaces were made for human bodies, and human bodies here. In many ancient cultures, ceremony depended on voice, rhythm, breath, movement, and repetition. Priests spoke in enclosed chambers. Processions passed through narrow approaches. Drums, flutes, shells, bells, clappers, chanting and silence could all shape experience. A building that deepened a voice, delayed an echo, focused a sound, or separated the outside world from the inner ritual did not need to be a mysterious device in order to matter. It only needed to affect those who entered it. In sacred architecture, perception itself is part of the structure. Some prehistoric and ancient sites have been studied for their acoustic properties, including caves with painted walls, stone chambers, temples, and ceremonial spaces where echoes, resonance, or sound direction appear unusually noticeable. Researchers have explored whether certain spaces may have been chosen or modified partly because of the way they sounded. The question remains complex. A striking echo does not automatically prove intentional design, yet it does invite a careful thought. Ancient people, who lived much closer to unamplified sound than modern people do, may have noticed acoustic effects with a sensitivity the present has partly lost. A cave is perhaps the oldest teacher of this mystery. Before temples, before carved halls, before written liturgies, the human voice entered dark stone and returned changed. In a deep chamber, sound does not behave like ordinary speech under open sky. It swells, breaks, circles, vanishes, and comes back from places the eye cannot see. For people moving by firelight through painted or marked spaces, the effect could have been powerful. The wall was not only seen, it answered. Whether such effects were always planned is impossible to say, but once experienced they could hardly have been meaningless. Later architecture could shape sound with more intention. A narrow passage can compress movement and quiet conversation. A high chamber can make a voice rise above its source. A closed sanctuary can separate sacred words from ordinary noise. A court can hold public speech. A stairway can create rhythm beneath many feet. Even silence can be engineered. Thick walls, inward turns, descending passages, and dark interiors can remove the world little by little until the listener feels that ordinary time has been left outside. In this sense, sound belongs to the hidden engineering of authority. A ruler seen from a distance may appear powerful. A priest heard in a dark chamber may seem to speak from somewhere larger than a single body. A chant repeated by many voices can make a community feel itself as one living thing. Architecture can help create that transformation. It can guide where people stand, when they see, when they hear, when they wait, when they move, when they are made small, and when they feel included in a pattern beyond themselves. This does not require trickery. Sacred experience is not always deception. A temple can shape emotion honestly while still serving power. A tomb can make silence heavy without pretending to be a machine. A chamber can magnify a sound without hiding a conspiracy in its stones. The lost engineering here may be less about secret acoustics and more about the total design of perception. Ancient builders often understood that human beings are not minds floating above matter. They are bodies moving through light, shadow, height, pressure, temperature, texture, distance, sound, and fear. That is why ritual architecture can be so difficult to reconstruct from ruins. The building remains, but the sequence is gone. A modern visitor enters by the wrong door, at the wrong time of day, without the procession, without the music, without the smell of smoke, without the rules of who may speak, without the long training that tells a participant what each movement means. The stones are present, but the event is missing. The result can feel like reading a script after all the actors have vanished. This may explain why some ancient spaces seem incomplete even when well preserved. They were never meant to be understood as empty rooms. They were instruments for occasion. A stair had meaning when climbed in order. A threshold mattered when crossed under restriction. A chamber changed when a voice filled it. A courtyard lived when people gathered inside its boundaries. Remove the ceremony, and the architecture becomes a shell. Beautiful, measurable, impressive, but partly mute. And there lies another kind of loss. Not the loss of how to cut stone, but the loss of how to inhabit it. A society can forget the use of a sacred space, even while the stones still stand. Later, people may preserve the building and misunderstand the motion. They may admire the carving, but not know when silence was required. They may map the floor plan, but not hear the old rhythm of feet. They may speak of function, yet miss the atmosphere that made the function real. Perhaps ancient builders shaped sound because sound shaped belief. Perhaps they did so sometimes by intention, sometimes by inherited practice, sometimes simply because certain forms had always produced the proper feeling. The evidence will not always answer cleanly. But the question itself reminds the listener that engineering is not only the management of weight, water, and stone. It can also be the management of human attention. And if attention can be engineered, then memory can be broken in more ways than one. A civilization may lose its tools, its recipes, its roads, its water systems, or its craft lineages. It may also lose the ceremonies that made those structures meaningful. And when that happens, the monument remains upright, but its voice begins to fade. From that fading voice, the path turns toward collapse itself, not the dramatic fall imagined in simple histories, but the slow unthreading of knowledge. Maintenance, meaning, and trust until a living system becomes a ruin. Collapse is often imagined as a single sound. A gate breaking, a city burning, a statue falling, a library turning to ash while frightened people run through smoke. Sometimes history does break that loudly. Earthquakes split streets. Armies enter temples. Floods erase fields. Fire can move through a storehouse, a palace, or a shelf of records with a speed that makes centuries feel fragile. But knowledge is not always lost in spectacle. More often, perhaps, it thins. It passes from certainty into habit, from habit into fragment, from fragment into rumour, until one day a later generation stands before the old work and no longer knows which questions to ask. This slow unthreading may be one of the most important forces behind lost engineering. A monument can survive the collapse of the society that built it, but the skills required to build, repair, interpret and maintain it may not survive with the same strength. The stone remains upright and gives a false impression of continuity, yet around it the living web has broken, the quarry is abandoned, the road is overgrown, the apprentices are gone, the temple calendar no longer rules the year, the canal is no longer cleared before the rains, the language of the inscriptions becomes difficult, then decorative, then unreadable. Natural disasters can begin that process with terrible efficiency. An earthquake can damage not only walls, but confidence. It can destroy workshops, bury tools, alter watercourses, break roads, and force survivors to choose between rebuilding tradition and simply remaining alive. A drought can be even more patient and more cruel. It does not need to topple a temple in one day. It can make labour impossible, scatter farmers, empty reservoirs, weaken rulers, and turn maintenance into luxury. When food fails, the training of masons and surveyors may become a smaller concern than the next harvest. A civilization under stress may not forget because it is careless. It may forget because survival has narrowed the future. Climate shifts, floods, volcanic eruptions, epidemics, and soil exhaustion do not merely damage populations, they damage the conditions under which knowledge is transmitted. A craft lineage needs more than a master and a pupil. It needs time, stability, demand, materials, and a reason to continue. If a city loses its wealth, if a ritual system loses authority, if a road network becomes unsafe, if the state can no longer feed workers or pay specialists, the craft does not vanish all at once. It becomes smaller. Fewer hands learn it. Fewer projects require it. The old standard softens. At last, what was once a living skill becomes an admired remnant. Conquest can accelerate the same forgetting. When one power replaces another, buildings may be reused, dismantled, renamed, or condemned. A temple can become a quarry. A palace can become a symbol of defeated arrogance. A sacred site can be stripped of its ritual grammar and made to serve a new faith, a new ruler, a new memory. Sometimes the new power preserves the old stones while breaking the old meanings. That kind of survival is complicated. It protects the structure, yet may erase the instructions for understanding it. There is also a quieter violence in administrative change. A monumental building culture depends on institutions, scribes, overseers, taxation, storage, seasonal labor systems, transport, measurement, and command. If those institutions collapse, the building knowledge attached to them loses its body. A mason may still know how to shape a block, but who can now gather the quarry crew? Who can feed them? Who can prepare the route, provide the ropes, maintain the tools, settle disputes, and keep work going across years? Skill without a supporting society becomes stranded. It may survive in smaller works, but the great form is gone. This is why the fall of ancient engineering is rarely a simple story of people becoming less intelligent. Human ability does not disappear because an empire falls. What disappears is arrangement. The specific pattern that connected resources, belief, authority, training, labor, and long-term purpose breaks apart. Later generations may be just as clever, but they live inside different systems. They solve different problems. They inherit ruins rather than workshops. They may look at an old wall with admiration, yet have no reason, no funds, no rituals, and no political structure to reproduce it. In some cases, knowledge was deliberately suppressed or redirected. A conquered people's sacred places could be treated as dangerous memory. Older calendars, rituals, languages, and building traditions could be discouraged because they kept a community attached to a past the new order wanted softened or erased. But even here, the story should not become too simple. Power does not need to destroy every tool to transform a culture. It can change incentives. It can make the old craft less useful, less honoured, less funded, less safe to practice. Forgetting can be enforced not only by burning but by making remembrance impractical. Libraries matter, but they do not contain everything. The burning of texts has become one of history's strongest images of loss, and rightly so. Yet the absence of books is only one form of darkness. A written recipe for mortar cannot fully replace the hands that know when the mixture feels right. A diagram of a water system cannot clear silt before the flood season. An inscription naming a ruler cannot restore the tax network that once delivered food to workers. Some knowledge can be recorded. Some must be performed repeatedly or it weakens. This is the hidden fragility of practical intelligence. It may look solid because its results are solid. The wall stands so the knowledge appears safe. The aqueduct still carries some water so the system seems alive. The terrace still holds soil so the mountain seems remembered. But every engineered world contains invisible maintenance. When maintenance stops, time begins asking questions. A small crack widens, a block drain overflows, a road loses its edge. A roof lets water into a chamber, a canal silts, a ritual loses its date, a skill loses its student. And then the ruins begin their second life. They become evidence without instruction, beauty without use, authority without administration. Later people may worship them, fear them, mine them, misunderstand them, or write new stories over them. The original engineering becomes harder to separate from later imagination. A broken place attracts explanations the way abandoned wells attract echoes. Some explanations are careful, some are convenient, some are made by conquerors, some are made by believers. Some are made by modern minds that would rather invent a secret than accept the ordinary tragedy of broken continuity. Perhaps this is the real warning inside collapse. Civilizations do not lose knowledge only because they fail to think. They lose it when the conditions that allow thought to become practice disappear. They lose it when memory is no longer useful enough to feed. They lose it when the living chain between hand and material is cut by hunger, power, disaster, or time. The monument may remain, but it has become an orphan, and once a monument is orphaned, another struggle begins, not over how it was built, but over who has the right to explain it. The next layer of lost engineering is not found in the quarry, the workshop, or the collapsed canal. It is found in the stories later powers told about the past, and in the uneasy fact that history is often written not only by those who remember, but by those who inherit the ruins and decide what kind of people the builders were allowed to have been. Once a monument becomes an orphan, it is rarely left alone. Others come to claim it. Conquerors come with new names, priests come with new meanings, scholars come with classifications. Empires come with measuring tools, maps, permits, museums, and the quiet confidence of those who believe that to record a thing is almost the same as owning it. The old builders are gone, and their silence becomes dangerous, because silence can be filled by anyone powerful enough to speak over it. Perhaps one of the deepest losses in ancient engineering is not only the loss of method, but the loss of authority over memory. This does not mean every later interpretation is false. Without later observers, many ruins would have been damaged, forgotten, or erased more completely. Archaeologists, historians, linguists, engineers, conservators, and local guardians have recovered extraordinary knowledge from broken places. They've read inscriptions, mapped cities, reconstructed languages, tested materials, protected sites, and challenged old myths. The problem is not study itself. The problem begins when the people who inherit the ruins decide too quickly what the original builders were capable of, and what they could not possibly have known. For centuries, many ancient monuments were interpreted through the prejudices of those looking at them. Colonial writers sometimes described indigenous works as too sophisticated for the people whose ancestors had built them. Great earthworks, stone cities, terraces, calendars, roads, and hydraulic systems were explained away or attributed to vanished outsiders, wandering tribes, lost races, or vague civilizing influences from somewhere considered more acceptable. The pattern was not innocent. If a society could be made to look incapable of its own achievements, then its land, memory, and future became easier to possess. This is one of the cruelest forms of historical theft. Not the removal of stone, though that happened often enough. Not the shipping of statues and reliefs across oceans, though that too changed the fate of many objects. The deeper theft was interpretive. A people could be separated from the evidence of their own intelligence. Their monuments could remain visible while their authorship was doubted. Their engineering could be admired, but only after being detached from them. The ruin became impressive, the builders became inconvenient, The ancient Americas suffered this often. Mounds, roads, cities, astronomical systems, terraces, and carved works were sometimes treated by outsiders as puzzles that required foreign explanation. The idea that local peoples could have organized complex societies, built large ceremonial centers, developed precise calendars, engineered landscapes, and sustained long traditions of construction was resisted not because evidence was absent, but because acceptance would have disturbed a preferred story of superiority. This is why some false mysteries are not harmless. They carry old hierarchies in a new costume. The same danger appears whenever ancient capability is treated as impossible before it is studied carefully. If people begin with the assumption that a civilization was too primitive, then every difficult wall becomes a scandal. Every alignment becomes suspicious. Every fitted stone becomes evidence that someone else must have helped. That someone else may be imagined as a lost race, a wandering master culture, or visitors from the stars. The costume changes, but the insult remains. Real builders are made invisible so that modern imagination can feel astonished without feeling responsible. Religious change also reshaped memory. Sacred sites could be absorbed, condemned, renamed, or reinterpreted. A temple's old alignment might remain, but the ritual calendar that once gave it meaning could fade. A carved image might be defaced not because the stone was useless, but because it remained powerful. A shrine might become a church, a mosque, a storehouse, a ruin, or a quarry. Sometimes this preserved the structure, sometimes it wounded it. Often it layered new meanings over old ones, until the original purpose became difficult to separate from centuries of reuse. Empires were especially skilled at this layering. They did not only conquer territory, they reorganized memory. They drew maps, renamed places, moved objects, translated inscriptions, chose which ruins deserved protection and which could be mined for building material. They placed artifacts in museums where they could be admired under glass, far from the landscapes, ceremonies, and communities that once gave them meaning. Again, the story is not simple. Museums have preserved objects that might otherwise have been destroyed, but preservation can still be entangled with removal. To save a thing from one danger may expose it to another. The danger of being understood only through the language of those who took it. There is a quiet power in naming. A site given a new name enters a new story. A people described as mysterious rather than skilled becomes easier to romanticize and easier to underestimate. A monument classified as primitive, monumental, oriental, exotic, pagan, or lost carries more than description. It carries the mind of the classifier. Later generations may inherit those terms without noticing the assumptions inside them. The stone remains the same, but the frame around it alters what people believe they're seeing. Even modern science, for all its strength, must guard against its own forms of arrogance. Instruments can measure what earlier observers could not. Scans can reveal hidden chambers. Chemical analysis can identify materials. Satellite imagery can uncover buried roads and settlements. These tools are valuable, yet the tool does not automatically remove bias from the person holding it. A ruin can be measured precisely and still interpreted narrowly. A civilization can be studied intensely and still not be granted the fullness of its own worldview. This is why listening matters. Local traditions, oral histories, place names, ritual memory, and community relationships to monuments cannot simply replace archaeological evidence, but neither should they be dismissed as decorative folklore. Sometimes they preserve clues. Sometimes they preserve meanings that documents lost. Sometimes they preserve a warning that the site is not merely an object of study, but part of a living landscape. The past is not always dead just because the original builders are gone. So who has the right to explain ancient engineering? The honest answer cannot belong to one voice alone. It must belong to evidence, to careful method, to living descendant communities where they exist, to scholars willing to revise themselves, and to a humility strong enough to admit when the stone has not answered yet. The ruins do not need flatterers. They need witnesses who do not reduce them to proof of modern superiority, religious triumph, colonial possession, or fantasy. Perhaps the most dangerous thing later powers did was not always destruction, but simplification. They turned complex builders into mysterious ancestors, primitive labourers, conquered pagans, anonymous hands, or impossible people. And once the builders were simplified, their engineering became easier to misunderstand. The next danger grows from that misunderstanding, because when real human achievement is denied for long enough, a vacuum opens, and into that vacuum rush the false mysteries, the glittering theories, the impossible machines, the hidden masters, and the stories that seem to honour the ancient world while quietly taking its humanity away. False mysteries do not arrive looking like insults. They arrive dressed as admiration. They say the stones are too perfect, the walls too large, the alignments too exact, the calendars too subtle, the materials too durable. They speak with wonder, and wonder is seductive. It feels generous at first. It seems to honour the ancient world by refusing to make it ordinary. Yet beneath many false mysteries lies a quieter theft. They praise the monument while doubting the builder. They marvel at the result, then remove it from the hands that made it. This is why the ancient world must be protected not only from dismissal, but from exaggeration. Dismissal shrinks the past until it becomes crude. Exaggeration enlarges it until it becomes unreal. Both errors end in the same place. The actual people disappear. The mason who learned stone through years of dust and correction is replaced by a lost machine. The surveyor who watched stars through a lifetime of patient observation is replaced by hidden super-science. The labour systems, administrative records, food supplies, seasonal planning, failed attempts, repairs, and human costs are swept aside because they're slower and less dazzling than a secret. It is easy to understand why people are drawn to such stories. A hidden civilization feels more exciting than a supply chain. An alien intervention feels more dramatic than a quarry. A forbidden technology feels more thrilling than generations of skilled workers measuring, testing, failing, and trying again. Modern life is crowded with information, yet often starved of enchantment. Ancient monuments offer a rare feeling of depth. They suggest that the world is older, stranger, and more capable than the flat surfaces of the present admit. The danger begins when that hunger for enchantment becomes careless with evidence. One common claim is that certain ancient works are simply too precise to have been made by known tools. The sentence sounds powerful until it is examined. Too precise compared to what? Too precise according to which measurement? Too precise for how much labour? How many attempts? How many years? How many specialists? How many abrasive processes? How many corrections? Precision is often treated as if it can only come from advanced machines, because the modern mind has forgotten how much can be achieved by disciplined slowness. The claim begins as awe, but often rests on impatience. Another claim points to weight. Blocks are too heavy, stones are too large, distances are too great, but heavy does not mean impossible. It means expensive in planning, labour, risk, and time. Ancient societies under certain conditions were willing to spend those currencies differently than modern societies would. They could direct large workforces towards sacred, royal, or imperial goals that may seem irrational from a modern economic perspective, but made deep sense within their own worlds. A giant stone was not merely a construction choice, it was a declaration. To erase the social meaning of that declaration and replace it with levitation is to make the past less human, not more mysterious. False mysteries also thrive in gaps. Archaeology rarely preserves the full sequence of a building project. The ropes are gone, the ramps are gone, the wooden frames have rotted, the workers' spoken instructions are gone, the trial runs, mistakes, and daily adjustments are gone. What remains is stone, tool marks, quarry traces, partial records, landscape evidence, and comparison. From these, careful researchers build models that may change over time. But uncertainty about exact method is not the same as permission to invent anything. A missing page is not proof of a hidden book. There is a subtle difference between an open question and an empty space. An open question still belongs to evidence. It invites testing, excavation, experiment, debate, and revision. An empty space in fantasy accepts whatever the imagination wants to place there. The ancient world deserves open questions. It does not need empty ones filled with stories that cannot be corrected. Wonder becomes stronger when it can survive contact with facts. A mystery becomes deeper when it is precise enough to be studied. Some speculative theories are especially damaging because they repeat old colonial habits in a new language. Earlier writers sometimes claimed that indigenous peoples could not have built their own monuments, so the works must have come from lost white races, wandering outsiders, or vanished civilizers. Today, the same structure of doubt may appear with new costumes. The builders could not have done this, so someone else must have helped. The words may sound modern. The wound is old. It still begins by denying capability to the people closest to the achievement. This does not mean every unconventional question should be mocked. Honest curiosity matters. Some accepted explanations began as challenges to older assumptions. Archaeology itself changes because people ask better questions, find new evidence, and revise what once seemed settled. There are genuine puzzles, unfinished stones, unclear transport routes, debated alignments, lost material recipes, damaged inscriptions, submerged structures, unexplained tool marks, and ritual meanings that resist translation. But a serious question accepts limits. It does not turn absence into certainty. It does not announce a conclusion before doing the work. The better path is harder but more rewarding. It asks how real people, with real materials, real constraints, real beliefs, and real social systems, accomplish things that still feel extraordinary. It does not flatten them into primitives. It does not inflate them into magicians. It lets them be builders. It lets them be observant, ambitious, brutal, devout, exploitative, patient, clever, mistaken, and brilliant. It allows them the full contradiction of humanity. There is also an ethical responsibility in how mystery is told. A story can invite awe without lying. It can admit uncertainty without manufacturing secrets. It can explore controversial theories without pretending all claims have equal weight. It can hold a candle near the unknown without setting the whole archive on fire. This matters because millions of people may first encounter ancient history through stories, videos, whispers, and images rather than formal study. If those stories teach them that evidence is boring and fantasy is brave, then the past becomes entertainment at the cost of memory. The real ancient world is already strange enough. Roman concrete that grows stronger through sea chemistry is strange enough. Inca walls that move with earthquakes are strange enough. Egyptian alignment, Maya calendars, Nabatean water systems, Indian rock-cut temples, Andean terraces, and forgotten roads beneath forests are strange enough. They do not need false engines humming beneath them. Their true power lies in the fact that human beings made them under conditions that would exhaust most modern confidence. Perhaps the final danger of false mystery is that it protects the present from humility. If aliens built the monuments, then modern people do not have to rethink their view of ancient intelligence. If a vanished superculture did everything, then no one has to respect the specific societies whose labour remains in stone. If everything difficult becomes impossible, then the past is safely removed from comparison. But if ordinary human civilizations built these things through discipline, organization, observation, and time, then the present must admit something uncomfortable. Progress did not move in one clean line toward us. Some forms of knowledge were lost, some were abandoned, some were never primitive at all. So the false mystery fades, and a stronger one remains. Not who came from the stars to rescue helpless builders, but how many kinds of human intelligence have already existed, flourished, vanished, and left only their hardest traces behind. From there, the path turns toward the present, where laboratories, scanning devices, experimental archaeologists, chemists, engineers, and patient field researchers are beginning to recover fragments of what was almost dismissed. The old stones have not finished speaking. Modern science is only learning how to listen without drowning them out. Modern science arrives at ancient monuments with instruments the builders could never have imagined. Yet the best of that science begins with a surprisingly old virtue: humility. The scanner, the microscope, the chemical analysis, the satellite image, the ground-penetrating signal, the experimental reconstruction, all of these can reveal what the unaided eye cannot, but they do not make the past simple. They do not turn ruins into solved equations. More often, they show how much was happening beneath the surface all along, and how easily earlier generations mistook silence for absence. This is one of the quiet gifts of modern research. It can rescue wonder from exaggeration. Instead of saying that Roman concrete was magical, material scientists can examine its mineral structure, its lime fragments, its volcanic ash, its slow reactions with seawater. Instead of saying that ancient stones were cut by impossible beams, experimental archaeologists can test abrasives, pounding stones, copper tools, wooden sledges, ramps, levers, wet sand, ropes, and human coordination. Instead of saying that vanished cities were legends, LIDAR can reveal roads, platforms, canals, terraces, walls, and settlement grids beneath forest canopies that once hid them from ordinary survey. The mystery does not vanish when evidence improves, it becomes more exact. A vague wonder says, how could anyone have done this? A sharper wonder asks, what combination of tools, labour, sequence, material choice, social organisation, environmental knowledge, and repeated correction made this possible? The second question is less theatrical, but it opens more doors. It does not push the ancient builder into darkness. It brings him slowly back into view. Experimental archaeology is especially useful because it returns the body to the problem. It is one thing to calculate how many people might move a stone. It is another to watch a team try, fail, adjust, sweat, coordinate, and learn that theory changes when weight begins to move. Experiments with dragging stones, raising megaliths, shaping hard materials, firing ancient ceramics, casting metals, weaving ropes, building boats, or mixing mortars do not always reproduce the original method exactly. They are not time machines, but they teach something essential. The possible is often wider than modern assumption, and the difficult is far more detailed than fantasy allows. A failed experiment can be as valuable as a successful one. If a proposed method breaks the rope, sinks the sledge, damages the stone, exhausts the workers too quickly, or requires materials not available in the region, then the ancient solution must be reconsidered. This is how respect grows, not through admiration alone, but through testing. The ancient achievement becomes clearer when modern bodies discover how unforgiving the task really was. The old builders were not merely lucky, they had methods refined by many trials that the present must sometimes rediscover through its own mistakes. Material science has brought another kind of listening. Under microscopes and chemical instruments, ancient substances begin to reveal their histories. Mortar, pigment, plaster, glass, ceramics, metals, and concrete are not mute. They carry traces of temperature, ingredients, impurities, mixing methods, weathering, repair, and local geology. A fragment of plaster can speak of lime burning and surface preparation. A ceramic shard can speak of clay source and firing conditions. A metal object can speak of ore, alloy, trade, and workshop skill. Even decay becomes information. This matters because many ancient achievements were not spectacular at first glance. A pigment that lasts, a waterproof lining, a stable mortar, a corrosion-resistant alloy, a road surface that sheds water, a plaster that breathes with a wall. These are not always the things that dominate popular imagination. Yet they often reveal the deepest practical intelligence. Civilizations endure not only through monuments, but through thousands of material decisions that keep buildings usable. Water-contained, roof-sealed, colours visible, and tools strong enough for the next day's work. Remote sensing has changed the scale of the question. From the air and from orbit, old landscapes reveal patterns hidden at ground level. LiDAR has been especially powerful in forested regions, where vegetation once made ancient urban networks appear smaller or more scattered than they were. Beneath trees, researchers have detected causeways, terraces, reservoirs, defensive works, platforms, and settlement densities that force revisions of older ideas about population, planning, and land use. The past becomes larger, not because anyone invented it, but because better instruments finally allowed the landscape to speak through its cover. Yet these tools also create a new responsibility. A scan can reveal a shape, but not automatically its meaning. A buried line may be a wall, a canal, a field boundary, a road, or something stranger. Data must still be interpreted. Ground truth still matters. Excavation, local knowledge, environmental study, dating methods, and careful comparison must follow the first thrill of discovery. Technology can widen sight, but it cannot replace judgment. The ancient world has suffered enough from people seeing patterns too quickly. Even so, the direction is unmistakable. Many old assumptions are weakening. Landscapes once imagined as empty are proving worked. Materials once dismissed as crude are proving complex. Construction methods once mocked as primitive are proving disciplined. Ancient builders were not modern engineers in disguise, and they do not need to be. They were something else. Practical thinkers inside worlds with different tools, different pressures, different beliefs, and different relationships to time. The present is beginning to understand that the loss was never absolute. Some traditions survived in descendant communities, regional crafts, oral knowledge, maintenance practices, and ordinary skills that formal history overlooked. Some ancient methods were not lost because they were impossible to preserve, but because modern institutions did not ask the right people or value the right kinds of knowledge. A mason, farmer, boat builder, potter, weaver, water manager, or ritual specialist may carry fragments of continuity that no archive can fully replace. The recovery of ancient engineering is therefore not only a laboratory project, it is also an act of listening to living memory where it remains. Still, recovery has limits. Some sequences are gone, some languages are unread, some workshops have vanished beyond reconstruction. Some ceremonies can be inferred only dimly. Some materials cannot be copied exactly because the local source, social system, or maintenance tradition no longer exists. Modern science can illuminate the ruin, but it cannot completely return the world that made it. That gap should not frustrate wonder. It is part of wonder's honesty. And perhaps this is the lesson modern research is slowly learning from the old stones. The past is not waiting to be conquered by explanation. It is waiting to be approached with enough patience that explanation does not become another form of possession. The instruments may be new, but the task is ancient. To look carefully, to test humbly, to revise without shame, and to admit that knowledge can survive in forms the present did not expect. From here, only the final question remains. If progress is not a straight line, then what are these monuments really telling us as they stand in the dark, outlasting not only empires but also the stories those empires told about time? If progress is not a straight line, then the monuments begin to look different in the dark. They no longer stand merely as evidence that earlier people did difficult things. They stand as quiet arguments against a comforting illusion. The belief that time always carries knowledge forward, that every later age naturally understands more than every earlier one, that the present sits at the top of a staircase built by everyone before it. The stones do not agree. The harbours do not agree. The broken aqueduct, the buried road, the mountain terrace, the carved temple, the old concrete beneath the sea, all of them suggest something more uneasy. Knowledge can rise, knowledge can scatter, knowledge can harden into a monument and disappear from the hands that once made it ordinary. This does not mean the ancient world was wiser in every way. It was not. It could be violent, unequal, superstitious, brutal, and limited. Its monuments were often built through systems of power that modern people would have no wish to restore. The same civilizations that aligned temples to the heavens could also command labor with harshness. The same hands that carved beauty could be controlled by kings, priests, tribute, slavery, conquest, or fear. Ancient engineering should not be softened into innocence, but neither should it be reduced to darkness. Human history has always been made from contradiction. A civilization can be morally troubling and technically brilliant. It can be spiritually rich and politically ruthless. It can leave behind works of beauty through means that make the beauty difficult to admire without unease. Perhaps that unease is part of the truth. Monuments are never only about skill. They are also about what a society is willing to spend itself on. A pyramid, a temple, a harbour, a ceremonial platform, a city road, a fortress wall. Each one asked not only how it was built, but why so much human time was gathered into that particular form. Behind every enduring structure is a decision about value. Some values were sacred, some were imperial, some were practical, some were cruel. Some were all of these at once. The stone records the decision, but not always the suffering, belief, hunger, pride, and fear that surrounded it. And still, the survival remains. That is the uncomfortable part. So much of the modern world is designed for replacement. Buildings rise quickly, serve briefly, and yield to newer uses. Materials are optimized for cost, speed, regulation, supply, and profit. Whole cities change their faces in a single lifetime. The ancient monuments, by contrast, carry another sense of time. They were not always built quickly. They were not always built kindly. But many were built with a seriousness that treated centuries as a reasonable audience. They remind the present that durability is not only a technical question, it is a cultural one. What would it mean to build as though time were watching? Not merely to make something large, expensive, or impressive, but to make something that belongs deeply to its place, its materials, its climate, its memory. Ancient builders often worked with constraints that modern people would find intolerable. No engines, no digital modelling, no steel cranes, no global supply chain arriving with perfect parts. Yet those constraints forced intimacy. They had to know the stone because they could not simply replace it. They had to know water because failure meant hunger. They had to know the sky because time itself was measured there. They had to know labour because every ambition passed through the body. The lost engineering of ancient civilizations may therefore be more than a collection of techniques. It may be a lost relationship to difficulty, a willingness to move slowly when slowness mattered, a respect for maintenance, a memory held in craft, not merely in documents, a belief that materials had personalities, limits, and forms of cooperation, a social ability to coordinate across generations, even when the reasons for doing so were tangled with power and hierarchy. The modern world has gained astonishing abilities, but it has also lost certain habits of attention. It sees far, calculates deeply, and builds at speed, yet often struggles to remain in conversation with what it builds. The monuments do not accuse directly. They're too old for that. They simply remain, and remaining is their form of speech. A fitted wall in the Andes says that irregularity can become strength. A Roman harbour says that matter can change with the sea instead of only resisting it. An Egyptian alignment says that a line on earth can answer a pattern in the sky. A Nabatean water system says that survival may depend on listening to dryness and flood at the same time. A rock-cut temple says that absence can be shaped as carefully as mass. A terrace says that a mountain can be taught to hold grain. None of these statements need to be exaggerated. Their plainness is enough. And perhaps the final mystery is not how ancient people could have been so capable. Perhaps the final mystery is why later ages found that capability so difficult to accept. Why does the present so often need the past to be either primitive or impossible? Why is it so hard to imagine that people without modern machines could still possess intelligence suited to their own world? The answer may lie in vanity. It may lie in distance. It may lie in the fact that admitting ancient competence makes progress feel less like conquest and more like exchange. Some things gained, some things lost, some things forgotten, some things waiting to be seen again. The ruins remain at that threshold. They are not proof that everything has been hidden. They are not proof that official history is meaningless. They are not invitations to abandon evidence. They are invitations to deepen it, to ask more exact questions, to respect uncertainty without worshipping it, to let wonder survive discipline, to imagine the builders not as shadows beneath legends, but as people who carried skills, burdens, beliefs, and memories into forms that have not yet finished outlasting us. Somewhere tonight a wall is cooling under starlight, somewhere seawater moves through ancient concrete. Somewhere a dry channel waits for rain that may never return. Somewhere a carved chamber holds a silence once filled by voices. The builders are gone, and the world that trained them is gone with them. But the work remains, patient and severe, asking no one to kneel before it, asking only that someone look carefully enough to understand that the past was never as simple as it was made to seem. And if the stones still keep their secrets, perhaps it is not because they refuse to speak. Perhaps it is because modern ears are only beginning after all this time to remember how to listen.